Our next speaker is Alain Schnapp, who is Emeritus Professor of Classical Archaeology at the University of Paris, Pantheon-Sorbonne. He has really made, in many ways, the field that we are engaging with today. His book on the history of antiquarianism in English from 1996, The Discovery of the Past, laid out the European story. He then moved on to develop, as I've said before, the field of world antiquarianism, a project at the Getty Research Institute that was then published in 2013. He has, of course, in addition, a history as a Greek archaeologist, and he worked for many years on the iconography and cultural history of antiquity, a publication some of you may know, Le Chasseur et la Cité, Chasse et Érotique dans la Grèce ancienne, from 1997. He was also a student of Vidal-Naquet, with whom he published a book in 1971 on the French student uprising. He has been a visiting scholar or visiting professor across the world: Princeton, Stanford, the Getty, Cambridge, Heidelberg, Basel, Napoli, Budapest, on and on. Most recently, he's the author of a very short book, a sketch, really, an essay, as he calls it, in comparative perspective on ruins, which is really a trailer for a magnificent and, I think, transformative book on the history and phenomenology of ruins in a world context that's soon to be published this year, I suppose. And so it's my pleasure to invite to the podium Alain Schnapp, who will talk to us about the notion of ruins in the medieval Islamic world.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you for all the people attending this meeting. And I wish to express in the beginning that speaking in an atmosphere in which so much people are, especially for the Islamic world, I have to apologize for looking at this Islamic vision of the past from the outside. I am myself a classicist and I have no direct knowledge of Arabic. I begin with this Al-Gahiz reflection, which seems a translation from Augustine in Arabic. Can you remember Augustine saying, if you wish to be a devout Christian, you have not only to look at the future, but to look at the past, because looking at the future means looking at the past. And I was very struck when I found this Al-Gahiz vision. This is to express that I will present you 5 different and complementary process of looking at the past. The first is the most important creation of pre-Islamic culture, the Mu'allaqat. And the Mu'allaqat has a pre-Islamic poetry, is a poetry of the present past, as Stephanie illustrated that in the previous lecture. The second part of my talk will be dedicated to the Islamic reception of the Mu'allaqat and the conception of the Jahiliyyah as a vision through which Islamic culture look at previous civilization. The third part will be devoted to the consciousness of the past in Egyptian culture. And in this way, I will approach very softly, because it's very the work is very difficult, to the concept of the city and the relation with ruins and the city in the theory of the first comparative history of city, which was an achievement of Islamic culture. And the last one will be a kind of reflection about the way in which the Shi'i tradition look at the past not from the point of view of the sociology of the past, but of the politics of the past. It's very hard to find before European Enlightenment such an attachment for the past, or for the political past, in the way in which the Iranian tradition developed this approach. So let we begin with a kind of general vision of Islamic relationship with the materiality of the past. Claude Cahen wrote an essay on this issue in the beginning of the 60s, and I think he was able to give a synthesis of this vision. The vision of the ruins of ancient monuments evoked in the course of time on the succession of peoples. The Quran is full of allusion to this past, and within the scope of a divine purpose, presents in its way an historical view of the world. Poetry maintained and idealized the remembrance. So in this way, we look at the pre-Islamic tradition, which gives the first structure of looking at the past. But this pre-Islamic vision, has the poet of Al-Ira, Hadi Ibn Zaid, developed it, is a poetry of the Ubisunt. The Ubisunt, which is a kind of heritage, again, of Christian culture, look at the present state of humanity and the former state of this humanity. But the point in Hadi Ibn Zaid is the connection not only with the present past, but with the remote past. Where is then Khosroes, the royal Anushirvan, and before him Shapur, and the noble Banu Asafar, kings of the Roman, of which no memory survives, or the lord of Al-Hadar, when he set about building, Int, and laying taxes from the Tigris, or Al-Abur. So you see the way in which, in this kind of poetry, the monumentality is a part of memory. Insidious death did not frighten him, but the kingdom slipped from his hands, and its threshold is abandoned. And remember the Lord of Al-Hawarnak. And Al-Hawarnak was one of the monuments which was attacked by ISIS. So this heritage of a kind of Greco-Christian heritage is present in the Mu'alakat. But the Mu'alakat are not looking at a very remote past, but at the present past. So each poetry is a Qasida, each of these Qasida is a kind of exploration of the self. Erased were the houses of Mina for a short stay or a longer sojourn, Rigam and gold return to permanence along with the high side of Orion, the impression of which is stripped down to the core, like stone revealing an inscription. But again, you see the presence of the past, but the philological, hermeneutical vision of the object which is embedded in this poetical construction. Salamahim Ganda, another of these Mu'alakat writers, wrote, to whom these marks, like an elegant written book, marks abandoned in the desert between Al-Suyab and Mutrik, a scribe learned into it with his inkwell, as novel for the eye as a fresh, white page. So this relationship with the monumentality of the inscription on the text is a part of the dialectic of permanence, impermanence, materiality, and immateriality. Abu Duyab al-Hudali, I recognize the houses in the same way in which one recognizes the page marked by the inkwell of the Himyarite writer. So this is the first description of the process of identification. So you have a parallel between the philological heritage of classical antiquity, of our Oriental scribes with the observation of the desert. And I found that one of these famous slides from Richard Leonard in Tunisia, which the Talib teaching in the desert, give us the idea of the presence of the traces in the culture of the desert. From the Mu'allaqat to the Islamic ruin, we have to face an hermeneutic change. If you take the traditional, on the one of the prince of the Mu'allaqat writer, Imru al-Qais, who says, "Hello and greetings, oh faded ruin, but how can one get that which only existed in remote times?" And in a kind of response to this Mu'allaqat aesthetic, Abu Nuwas will approach from the Islamic point of view and ask the people to leave this memory, to go to a more efficient introduction of history in the structure of poetry, relinquish the faded ruins and the passionate description of houses and embers, forget the Bedouins, leave them to their misery, their dispossession and their misfortune. And you see the passage from a kind of desert poetry to a more urban one. Statkiewicz has given us a translation from one of the first Islamic poets, which looked not only at the ruins, but at the ruins of the prophet. At Taiba, there remains the prophet's relics on a luminous encounter place, while other relics fade and waste away. The idea that the relic of the founder, the relic of the prophet, are not fading is a part of the discourse which you could find in the traditional poetry of medieval France. Look at, for example, the Hildebert de Lavardin, speaking on Rome in the same way in which he is speaking from the prophet. Indelible are the signs of that inviolate abode, where the guy's pulpit stands on which he used to mount. It stands so clear, the contours firm, and there his precincts with a prayer place and mosque. There his chambers are, there the Lord's light founds its repose, to give him light and warmth, things which will not be effaced as time goes by, finding renewal in each decade. This seems to be literally translated from one words of Hildebert de Lavardin in the relationship between, the image of Rome and the poetry of the past. But another man who is not a poet, but a politician, a warrior, Hussam Mahin Munkid, wrote the first description of campsites and abode in Syria. And he express his idea of looking at the past like Fabry de Peresque describes some French ruins in the 17th century. What moved me to compile the present book was the ruin which had visited my country and my home. So this is one of the first expressions of personal relationship with a place. Time, in all its arrogance, seemed to have made it designed to efface them by every means. Everything came to be as if it had never existed. And after he will express, I go to the conclusion, my only solace I found in the compilation of this collection, and I make it from my thirst over my home and over those I loved. I know it's too late for help or benefit now, but all the same, in it goes all that I have. So you see the emergency of the autonomy of the writer or of the autonomy of the antiquarian looking at the present past. Al-Buturi, and this is one of the poem, he's one of the most considered poetry on the is one, Kisra, which you have seen in the previous lecture, in which Al-Buturi tried to explain the dialectic of looking at the past, at describing the past, and explaining the past. I direct my stoots Shikamo to Madain, and console myself for such luck, and find solace in a sight for the Sassanian ruined. Perpetual misfortune reminds me of them. Misfortune makes one remember and forget. So again, this relationship with remembering and forgetting. But one of the most interesting things in this poetry is the art of giving voice to the ruin itself. We are not facing only the poet description, but the ruin saying, I am here poetically and in my own presence, as if the arch hall, for lack of humanity and sheer abandonment, is a grave edifice. If you saw it, you should know that the knights are holding a funeral in it after a wedding. It will inform you of a troop's marvels. The record does not grieve with obscurity. When you see a panel of the Battle of Antioch, you tremble among Byzantine and Persian. So the materiality of image is such that you see the image proceeding from the words. And further, you have this relation, again, to Anushirvan, but you have a description of the scene which is exactly like the description given by 12th or 13th century visitors in Rome, describing the relief and the murmur of the city. Men in combat are under his command. Some are quiet and ushered, some are intense, rushing forward with spear points, others are cautious, and of them using shields. The eight depict them much alive. They have between them speechless sighs. My wonder about them boils still. My hand explores them with a touch. The idea that you proceed from the conception of this kind of poetics of the monument to touch the monument. And if you look at the Byzantine antiquarianist of the 14th, 15th century, the most achieved dimension, which is given by Emmanuel Chrysolaras, is to say, the Romans are stupid, the Roman antiquarians, because they are not able to touch antiquity. And I have this capacity because I was educated in this idea of the materiality of the past. Another poet of the 11th century, Al-Sharif al-Murkadam, says, behold, there was the sovereign Sassanid built, of time battered it, torn down, effaced it, courtier owns the canopy of even, then by adversity brought blow to earth, and as soul so rich, its fruited sweet delight, will the dust of other land issue, but acid wets on grass. So the idea that in some dimension, the capacity of the ruin to create the dimension of poetry is not only a capacity which brings you at a rational description, but a capacity of enjoying the past, a kind of ode to the vision of the past. You go in the ruins and you enjoy yourself. This will be part of the program of the Enlightenment. Look at Diderot, saying, if a ruin is so beautiful, I find myself in the ruin. And Al-Mutamid, who is one of the small rulers of al-andals in the 11th century, goes to the ruins of Al-Zahra. And clearly the ruins of Al-Zahra are the most important ruins in the poetic of al-Andalus. They climb to the topmost rooms until they arrive finally in the garden after having examined the ruins closely, their view increased in increment as they went in the garden. They settled themselves on springtime carpets striped with flowers and bordered with streams and water channels. So you have this kind of delight of the court in the description. And when I look at that, I have the feeling that this kind of poetics anticipate the Italian poetics of the ruins, which you find in Mantegna's expedition of the Lake of Garda in the beginning of the 15th century, when Mantegna said, "When I look at this landscape, I find myself in antiquity." So all these process of looking, describing, enjoying the ruins are part of a general Islamic culture on the West. And Ruggles, who has written the most important books on al-andals, resume his the question in these few words. The decayed Roman and Visigothic palaces, temples and churches that the early Muslims had encountered on the Iberian Peninsula did not provoke such melancholy, the melancholy which saw in Al-Zahra and Islamic ruins, because the Roman remains were regarded as foundation upon which to build liberally the new order. They posed no reason for regret and nostalgia for a time when life was simpler and fortunes more secure. The Umayyad ruins, in contrast, were not rebuilt, and instead of presenting an opportunity for creating a new order, they symbolize the passing of a better one. So this is relationship which will, in Latin you could say, this is relationship between the Vetustas concept and the Antiquitas concept. And in Arabic you will probably look at the relationship between the Aklal concept and which is more founded in the pre-Islamic tradition and post-Islamic tradition, and the Atar concept. Two ways of describing the ruin which different meanings. The most important reception of the past is clearly to find in Islamic Egyptian erudition. And Abdel Latif al-Baghdadi wrote an essay in the 13th century in which he described the presence of the pyramid. Of all the country that I have seen with my own eyes, or now, or through the experience of others, none can compare with Egypt for the great number of monuments. So, and he will express this quality by the philosophy on the shape of the ruins. But at the end, he will say, their shapes is what conferred them the advantage of being able to resist the effort of the many centuries. Or rather, it seems that it's time that had resisted the effort of this everlasting edifice. When I read that, I have the impression to reading the Abbé de Lille, speaking about the Roman ruins. Leur masse indestructible a fatigué le temps. So the inversion of the relationship between the ruins and the poet, which is a kind of philological description of the past, in which Ali Baghdadi expressed his admiration. So it's not only the Alaïb vision, but the rationality which is present in the materials and stone with which the city was built, devastating his building and mutilating the stone that constituted his ornament. His ruin offered to the spectator a confluence of wonders. So ruins are instrument of reflection of education. And speaking about the people who tried, like Aymamun, the caliph, to destroy the pyramids, Abdel Latif will write, the sovereigns first considered the pyramids as an historical record of sorts, serving as a reminder of the memory of centuries past. Next, they are in a sense witnesses of the books of Revelation, since mention is made in the Quran of the peoples that worship them. The view of what is left of them adds everyone personal experience, no doubt of authority, and thus confirms the veracity of tradition. I insist on personal experience. You look not only with your rationality, you look at that with your experience. Al-Idrisi, in a wonderful translation by Ahman, will go further in trying to express the sensibility of ruins. Again, this is not the poet which is speaking, but the ruins which will spoke. Remembering events of our times and episodes of the past, it comes back to my mind how I once went past the temple of Luxor on the river Nile, traveling together with my beloved late father, when both of us were on our way to Sama and Tama in the south. So when he will describe it, and I go to the end of this quotation, my father spoke to me and said the following words. My son, look at the building the Pharaoh have built and how this fool destroyed it. The destruction of all the lessons of a profound beholder could have learned, and all those willing could have taken heed of reading these inscription, pains, and worries me a lot. So the capital of learning, which is embedded in the monument, is a part of a cultural experience of history. If I could, I would prevent these fools from achieving their work of destruction. What great wisdom vanishes from our world by their deeds. The horses of our prophet companions, God have mercy on them, have touched and roamed these lands when they advanced after the conquest of Egypt to Nubia. And these extraordinary men have sent these monuments with their own eyes without touching them with descriptive hand. No as admonition for all those willing to learn, who are open-eyed observers, and as a memorial for all those who are knowing and have kept their ears open, they have left standing intact. And this respect is connected with the idea that the ruins have a psychological dimension. Passing a house in Siat, I was frightened by the outcry of stones under the pickaxes, the cry of the stones. So the stones are, in some way, living beings. And you saw a lot of spolia in Islamic culture, in Egypt and Syria. Here, some choice of these using of spolia. So Egyptian ancient hieroglyph, again reliefs from Assyrian origins, again Latin inscription, again Egyptian hieroglyph, Christian, the entrance of a church, they used in a madrasa. In these two ways. And in looking at that, I was struck by Isaac Goldziher commentary on the tradition. When he said, what is the spolia problem is, how is a spolia accepted and interpreted? And Isaac Goldziher have this extraordinary ironic description which is taken directly from Arabic source. The transmitter of tradition, those who do not understand what they have remembered, are like camels carrying shells. It is of no use for the shells to be carried by camels, but neither the camels will take any advantage of the shells. And this ironic vision brings clearly to the idea, the historicity of the ruins. And I think Ibn Khaldun was the first to create the network for a evolutionary sociology of architecture. And in some way, if you look at Ibn Khaldun, you have the impression that he announced Georg Simmel's theory of ruins as a return from the culture to the nature. Many people view this great monument and construction of the ancient, such as the reception hall of Khosrow, the pyramid of Egypt, the arch of the Malgara, and those of Churchill in the Maghreb, think that the ancient erected them by their own unaided powers, whether they worked as individuals or in groups. They imagined that the ancient had bodies proportional to those monuments. So he introduce the theme of rationality if reconstructing the construction. But he goes further in describing the process of creation of a monument, to erase a monument, and to accept it in the context of a general philosophy of the past. So again, he will quote the Arch of Khosroes, but the most important reflection he developed is that it is a relationship between luxus, civilization, and production. And the first theory of, in some way, the historical dialectic of ruins, the beginnings of the ruins of cities. It should be known that when all cities are first founded, they have few dwellings and few building materials, such as stones and quicklime, or the things that serve as ornamental coverings or walls, such as tiles, marble, mosaic. Thus, all that time, the buildings are built in Bedouin style, and the material used for them are perishable. Then the civilization of a city grows, and its inhabitants increase in number. Now the material used for building increase because of the increase in available labor and the increased number of craftsmen. This process goes on until the city reaches the limit in that respect, as was discussed before. The civilization of the city then recedes and its inhabitants decrease in number. So this idea of the cycle of the city is absolutely not present in any Western source, but you find it in the song poetry of the city. And we discussed that some years ago when Peter organized the first conference on antiquarianism in Chinese and Western society. I have to go further, and I will finish this general vision by the way in which the Persian, from the Buyid to the 15th century, will look at the ruin of the past. We clearly the tombs of Naqshi Rustam, with all the succession of Sassanid, Buyid, and other inscription, is a clear vision of creating a politic of memory, reusing traces of antiquity. In the inscription in Passagarde, you have a series of reflection on poetics on the tomb of Cyrus. So in this way, using this inscription, you create an emotional relation with the ruler, Saad Ben Zangi. I apologize, I have only the German translation, which connects the Arabic distich with the Persian one, saying that in some way, the Sultan, Said Ben Zandi, is the heir of Solomon. So the Achaemenids are becoming the King Solomon, and the actual ruler of Iran are presenting themselves as the heirs of Cyrus. You have the mihrab on the tomb of Cyrus in Passagarde. You have a series of inscriptions exalting the ruler of the 14th, 15th century Persia, and the most exceptional poetry of this time is to find in the private palace of Darius at Persepolis. May order undisturbed remain for years, and every part of us fall into place. Maybe these lines remain of use, for else no permanence in human life I trace, unless for us pursue la prayer be saved by some pure mystic as an act of grace. This is a quotation of Saadi Golesland, which will be found in another inscription, which reusing the last verses of Saadi, but will describe not only the presence of the ruler, but the acting and the performance of the government of the army, of the Persian army, in front of the ruins. In the month of Shawwal, in the year 8 to 6, when his victorious subject owing allegiance, the king of the world, under the aegis of the Caliphate, the most just of the emperor of Iran, and Turan, the supporter of the truth, and of the kingdom of the world, of a religion, Abdul Fath Ibrahim Sultan, set up his royal pavilion and proclaimed his rule in his lofty site and eminent place, the lawless of his subjects, Kamaluddin Inact, who is one of the courtiers, had the honor of happiness of inscribing these words. So you have not only to perform, you have to write, and you have to firm your own inscription. These are part of the political use of the past that you find in several inscriptions in Persepolis and in the palace of Darius. Who from the world will seek for constancy, constant which with whom was it, with us will be. The rule of Solomon has run its span, the world is here, but where is Solomon? How much could Sam and Solomon retain of countless gold and glitter of their own? And this seems a quotation of Hadin Ibzad, with which I began my lecture. So you have a kind of regional vision of the past in any of these different parts of the Islamic world, but you have also a reuse of the tradition, which is extraordinary in some way, because you feel the dynastic vision, the political vision, and the personal embodiment with the past. In this inscription of Sultan Khalil on the palace of Darius, you see that God's approval to you makes acquire, whose goodness and whose noble deeds abound, his goodness will again to him redound. But the inscription is interesting. Inscribed by Ali, son of Sultan Khalil, God such a gift of verse of me bestows, that too, but 9 years old, I can compose. So this a young, a kind of 9 years, who officially was able to write such an inscription. Thank you.